Today, we are going to talk about Carvana's return to the spotlight. Carvana is a startup that sells cars online. Its stock price rose by over 900% this year. If you bought $1,000 of Carvana stock in January 2023, by August 2023, 8 months later, your Carvana stock would have been worth $9,000. Jim Cramer predicted Carvana should have collapsed by now, and it didn't turn out well for him. Unfortunately, now that Carvana's stock price is so high, people are starting to get a little fearful now. And it's not the FOMO type of fearful where people pour money into the stock in droves. It's the opposite. Investors are now a little more bearish. They're scared of Carvana's stock price that might fall dramatically in the coming months. We're going to try to figure out whether Carvana will continue its upward trajectory or whether it will fail to sell enough cars to remain open. Let's see if Jim Cramer actually had a reason to believe Carvana should have collapsed by now. Carvana's rise can only be explained after you understand what caused its stock to fall by over 90% in the first place. Back in the pandemic era, Carvana was one of the many companies that benefited greatly from the pandemic economy. Forced to stay inside, car buyers could only shop online. Usually, if you wanted to buy a car, you're supposed to go to a used car dealership, check out the car physically, and see if anything is wrong with it. There definitely will be some problems. It's more about getting what you paid for. Once you're satisfied with the car you've selected, you take it home with you. Carvana disrupted the used car market by allowing car buyers to find, inspect, and finance your cars online. Once you're done choosing your car, you can head on over to one of Carvana's fully automated vending machines to get your car out. There's almost zero human interaction involved, a situation many doctors during the pandemic greatly encouraged to stop the pandemic from spreading. Government stimulus checks meant users had more buying power at the time as well. The entire situation was a godsend to Carvana, which was a budding startup at the time. They ran with it, selling thousands of cars. Carvana became the number 2 largest used car seller in the nation, just behind CarMax. Wall Street celebrated as Carvana's stock price skyrocketed to dizzying heights. That $360 per share was a dream that came crashing down once the pandemic ended. Obviously, after the pandemic, the economics of buying used cars shifted. More and more people were going outside. Companies that focused on the indoor economy saw their valuations collapse. Zoom, Netflix, Carvana, and many others failed to keep up with investor expectations which they had cultivated during the pandemic. Carvana couldn't sell enough cars. Its revenues dropped from their lofty pandemic highs. A recession had set in. Consumers had less money to spend on used cars. The interest rate hikes, which the Federal Reserve Chair kept pushing, was scaring car buyers away from loans. Car manufacturers that had to stop making new cars in the pandemic resumed production. A wave of new cars entered the market. Less people needed the used cars Carvana was peddling. More problems appeared. Processing the paperwork for drivers was starting to slow down Carvana's operations. Many customers of Carvana's used cars complained about not getting titles to the cars they bought. There were long delays before the titles were issued. Many Carvana customers reported they were harassed by police and sent to jail for driving a car they clearly paid for but did not officially own. Sometimes, the police and Carvana customers claimed the cars from Carvana were actually stolen cars.
Jimmy Torres bought this Lexus SUV from Carvana. He had not yet retired to Florida. He says it took months to get his Michigan plate, and now he can't get a Florida plate because Carvana and its lender partner haven't located the title and sent it to the state.
And every time I called, everybody's sorry, but I still don't have a title.
Sorry doesn't help you, does it?
No, sorry does not help you.
This one online at Carvana. But 4 months after buying the SUV, he's one of a troubling group of Carvana buyers trapped in a tidal web of mystery. He still can't register the vehicle in his name because Carvana hasn't provided the title.
We don't drive it anymore right now, it just sits.
It didn't help that Carvana was still burning money to operate the business. Things got worse when Carvana decided to buy a used car auction company, ADESA, for $2.2 billion. The logic here was the purchase of ADESA would help them jumpstart car sales. It didn't quite work out like the company hoped it would. What happened instead was Carvana borrowed too much money. They had to pay back a lot of interest for the over $8 billion in debt. Meanwhile, as 2023 rolled around, despite Despite the recession, markets rallied. Investors were more optimistic about the economy for some reason. Companies saw their valuations rise. Carvana's Q1 earnings was pretty good compared to last year's. Carvana stock rallied as well, but not too much. It went from roughly $5 a share to $12 a share. Then, more good news. Carvana's Q2 earnings wasn't as bad as expected. The cost-cutting and layoffs were improving the company financials. Carvana reported they reached a total gross profit per unit of over $6,000 per car sold. Investors piled onto the stock, triggering a short squeeze. Degenerates living behind their Wendy's dumpster 2 blocks away from Wall Street bets celebrated as short sellers lost over $1 billion while retail traders took profits. Investors became more optimistic when Carvana secured a deal with bondholders to reduce its debt pile by $1.2 billion. Apollo Global was one of the key creditors who supported the deal. The agreement would eliminate over 80% of its 2025 and 2027 unsecured note maturities. That meant Carvana could pay $400 million less in interest payments for the next 2 years. Investors poured into Carvana stock after the good news in mid-July. Currently, Carvana stock sits at $49 per share, a far cry from its pandemic numbers, but still a worthy achievement nonetheless. There's no guarantee Carvana will continue doing well. Carvana still has to repay their debts eventually. Only time will tell whether Carvana's business will thrive in the coming years. I hope you liked the video. Leave a like if you did and subscribe if you haven't already. It's much appreciated.